There's a lot of excitement around the New York Islanders this offseason with a new GM and the first pick in the draft. But there's one important issue that not a lot of people have been talking about this offseason. We're going to examine it and what impact it has on the Islanders this year and beyond next on today's Locked On Islanders podcast.
You're Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Thursday edition of the Locked On Islanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. I'm Gil Martin. I've been covering the New York Islanders for almost 2 decades, and I wrote the book Ice Wars on the history of the Islanders' rivalry with the Rangers from 1972 to the modern era. So glad you could join us today to talk a little Islanders hockey. We have got a lot to discuss on today's show. We're going to talk about a major issue that is sort of under the surface for this team, but the Islanders better get it right when the season gets underway. Plus, some interesting meetings at the draft combine, one between Islanders GM Mathieu Darche and the GM of the Utah Mammoth, and another player that the Islanders met with who was looked at as a late first or early second round pick. We'll break that down, talk about that player, and a lot more on today's show. We got to start with this underlying issue. And, you look back at the last season, and injuries were definitely a part of the problem for the New York Islanders. And let's not kid ourselves here. When you have an older roster, like the Islanders definitely do, you're going to be a little bit more prone to injury. And when players do get hurt, it's going to take them, on average, a little bit longer to recover than it would if they were, a 38-5-year-old player usually takes longer to recover from the same injury than a 25-year-old player. It's just the way it works. Human nature, the body, how we age, all of that, all taken into consideration. But of all the injuries that the Islanders had to deal with, and unfortunately, there were a lot of them. Mathew Barzal, Anthony Duclair. One of the most important injuries was Semyon Varlamov. And Varley was injured in November, late November, and did not return for the rest of the season. He played in 10 games. And keep in mind, everydayers will remember that the Islanders started the season, maybe the first, week or so, where Varlamov got the start and most of the early season work because Ilya Sorokin was coming off of back surgery, and while he was on the roster opening night, he wasn't yet 100% and ready to go. For the rest of the season, though, after Varlamov got injured, and he only played 10 games all year, 3 wins, 4 losses, 3 overtime losses, a .289 goals against average, and .889 save percentage. But for all of that, once he got hurt, the Islanders did not have a backup goalie that they trusted. And eventually, Marcus Hogberg, he got off to a pretty hot start, so they started to trust him a little bit. Hogberg got hurt. They were down to eventually Jakub Skarek and Tristan Lennox. Skarek, likable kid, works hard, not really considered a prospect. He's back in Europe now, signed there. Lennox, maybe eventually an NHL goalie, but certainly wasn't ready last year. I mean, nice that he got his feet wet by playing in his first game, but they weren't going to let him start and play significant minutes. And when Hogberg returned from injury, he was back to what most scouting reports said about him, which was, he's the third goalie in your system for a reason. And, if guys get hurt, you could put him in for a couple of games, but he's not a great NHL caliber goalie at this stage in his career. The point is this: if you're Mathieu Darche, how comfortable are you with Semyon Varlamov being your backup goalie to start the season? And I am a big fan of Varley, okay? He's been a really great goalie, but he's also 37 years old. And in goalie years, that's a senior citizen, okay? The .889 save percentage and the 2.89 goals against average, the .889 save percentage was the worst of his career. The 2.89 goals against average was his worst mark since 2021-2022 and one of the worst 3 or 4 of his NHL career. Granted, a small sample size. But if Varley is not ready to start the season, or worse yet, if Varley gets hurt again, the one thing the Islanders cannot afford to do now, in this coming year, again, you can't wear down Ilya Sorokin. Ilya Sorokin, you say what you want about him. He is what stood between the Islanders and a lottery pick last year. Like a top 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 lottery pick. Without Sorokin, the Islanders are not even going to sniff the playoffs. They need a really high quality goalie playing at a really high level. But this past season, and even more the season before, Ilya Sorokin got overused, overworked. If you recall 2 years ago when the Islanders last made the playoffs, it was Varlamov who played most of the last 10 games and most of the playoff games against Carolina because Sorokin was worn down. Maybe the back was already an issue at that point. We don't know because the Islanders never said anything. But clearly, you don't want Ilya Sorokin starting 60 games again next year. And if you don't trust Marcus Hogberg to be more than a guy starting 1 or 2 games at a time, and Semyon Varlamov is injury prone at this point in his career and questionable to be back, you better fortify that backup goalie position. Or here's the alternative. Everybody's talking Mathieu Darche, the owners, Patrick Roy. Everybody's saying, yeah, we think this team can make the playoffs this year. And look, maybe they can, but I still think the way this team is presently constituted, that their ceiling would be, and that's if everybody stays healthy and relatively speaking, and there's some breaks along the way, their ceiling is a wild card, barely squeaking into the playoffs or barely missing the playoffs, and most likely a first round exit. But if you don't get a little goalie insurance, maybe quietly this team is saying we may not make the playoffs. You've got to limit Ilya Sorokin to between 50 and 55 starts, preferably 50 to 52. okay? I would like a 52-30 split between Sorokin and your backup. And you've got to avoid those situations where Sorokin starts 14 out of 15 games, okay? One thing about a back injury, yeah, you could heal to whatever extent, and you could be pain-free to whatever extent, but backs never fully go back to normal. And at any time, one wrong move, one twist the wrong way can really re-aggravate a back injury. It's just the nature of backs. The Islanders must be comfortable with their backup goaltending situation heading into the season, whether it's a healthy Varlamov and a third goalie who they're comfortable with, if that third goalie needs to start 25 games to 30 games next year. Backup goalie is important. We have seen how it can affect this team. The way this team is put together, goaltending is huge for their success. It has been since Barry Trotz arrived. And when your team is 27th in the league in goals scored, and you lost one of your top goal scorers in Brock Nelson, you darn well better get really good goaltending if you hope to win consistently. And that doesn't just mean you have a great starter, because the days of, goalie starting 70 plus games a year are past us right now. And even if they weren't, Ilya Sorokin has not proven that he can handle that kind of workload. So if I'm Mathieu Darche, I may look into adding another goalie if there's questions about Varlamov and if they don't have enough confidence in Marcus Hogberg to say, you know what, Big Hog, if we need you, 30 games, 35 games, we trust you. If the answer to those two questions is no, then the Islanders need to work on that and bring in a backup goalie. We will see what happens during this offseason, but it's a potentially big issue that very few people have been talking about this offseason, and understandably so, given all the other things that have been going on. All right, we have got more to get to on today's show. Some reports that Mathieu Darche has met with the GM of the Utah Mammoth. We'll talk about what that could mean. We'll also have our Islanders birthday of the day, a New York City native who played defense for the Islanders during the mid-1990s. Let's see if you can guess who this is. We've got all that and more on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. If you're looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious, crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no-shells variety. It's the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost, they're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. So get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. That's wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. So, some reports coming out after the scouting combine. Hockey News had this one, that the New York Islanders, Mathieu Darche, met with Utah Mammoth GM Bill Armstrong. And they spoke at the trade deadline. And maybe this has something to do with the top pick or the fourth pick in this year's NHL draft. And, meeting at the combine, it's the combine, obviously not the trade deadline last year because Darche, well, he wasn't the GM of the Islanders yet, but at the combine, all rumors, all information that we've heard seem to indicate that right now Darche is leaning toward Matthew Schaefer with that first pick. But we also know James Higgins is there. And could the Islanders try to acquire Utah's fourth pick overall in this draft to double up and get Schaefer and then Higgins? That is maybe one possibility, or maybe you swap the first pick for the fourth pick and add another piece to the puzzle. Utah, according to several reports, may be looking for a young top six forward. Does that mean there's a slight chance that restricted free agent Simon Holmstrom would be part of a deal? I don't think the Islanders are looking to move him, nor do I think they should. Another option that was discussed, Anthony Duclair. Not so sure there would be a lot of interest in the Duke after the way his season ended, but who knows? Or another player who has been mentioned as a possible trade target if Utah is looking defense. You got Alexander Romanov, you've got Noah Dobson, maybe even Scott Mayfield. Dobson and Romanov are restricted free agents. Mayfield maybe would give Utah that experienced right shot defenseman. There are a lot of things that could be in the works. And look, let's face this. Just because they're talking doesn't mean anything will come of it. They could just be putting out feelers and trying to figure out, okay, what would it cost if I was interested in this player? Or is this guy available? Or if we swapped picks, what would it take? It could be very preliminary discussions. But the reason that it was interesting to me, this year's NHL draft is not centralized. It is not being held where all 32 teams and their GMs and their scouts and their coaches and, everybody is going to be in the same place at the same time. This is going to be, people calling in and doing things remotely. So the scouting combine, as a result, is the last time that most NHL GMs and their assistants are all in the same place at the same time before the draft. And since they won't be all together during the draft, again, that was an opportunity for talks to be held. And I find it very interesting that the Mammoth, still got to get used to saying that, but the Mammoth, the Utah Mammoth, and the New York Islanders had conversations. And we'll see if anything comes of it. But in my mind, as long as the Islanders stay in the top 3 or 4 picks and get a nice haul in return, I have no problem trading back from 1 to 2, 3, 4, and being able to pick Higgins and maybe adding a young prospect, a highly regarded prospect, another number 1 pick in 2026, and then grabbing Higgins. Whatever the haul might be. And if it also potentially involves making deals that would make this team younger, faster, and more skilled, free up some cap space, possibly move out some veteran players to allow the necessary changes that are needed for this team to take place, I am there. So, again, you could speculate from now until doomsday about what might be discussed and what could be on the table. But ultimately, the fact that these two general managers got together and discussed possible moves, it's interesting. It's something to keep an eye on. We will keep our ear to the ground with our various sources and see if anything more comes of it. But I'll say this. If I'm Mathieu Darche, here we are with what, 2.5 weeks to go before the draft. If anybody calls me and asks about the number 1 pick or about a trade, I may not be eager to do it, but I'm listening. And if I can do things, whether it's in discussions or spreading rumors or letting some quotes be leaked, if I could do things to drive up the price of players I want to trade away, or of, hey, you want the first pick? It's, the knock your socks off comment that Darche made at his introductory press conference. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to trade the pick. And if people want that pick, they have to knock my socks off. It's designed to raise the price of potentially having another team acquire that pick. So just something to keep your eye on. Interesting little tidbit. And we'll see if anything ends up coming from it. We have got more to get to on today's show. The Islanders at the Combine spoke to a potential late first round, early second round pick. We'll talk a little bit about him and where he might fit into the Islanders, what, if anything, it could mean. We'll also have our Islanders birthday of the day. Lots to discuss on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. So still kind of wrapping up a few things from the Combine. I mean, we did the crossover episode yesterday. If you didn't get a chance to see it, Joey Erickson of Locked On Dallas Stars talking about Jason Robertson and, what the Stars might want for him, why he might be available, all of that kind of stuff being discussed. So it kind of delayed some of the other topics that I was going to discuss regarding what happened at the Combine. And one of them was this. Mathieu Darche met with, and the Islanders did interview, Cameron Schmidt from the Vancouver Giants. And Cameron Schmidt is a very speedy Prince George, British Columbia native, 18 years old, had 40 goals and 78 points in 61 games for the Vancouver Giants in the Western Hockey League. And, he can shoot the puck. He's got the speed. There's one little catch. He's 5'7", 161 pounds. 5'7" is certainly a concern when it comes to whether or not he'll be good enough to play in the NHL. Now, in the Elite Prospects Final Draft Guide, Cameron Schmidt is ranked 22nd. That would put him at the bottom third, roughly 2/3 of the way through the first round. The Islanders, their next pick in the draft after they have pick 1 is pick 42. Is it possible Schmidt falls to 42? Yeah, based on his size. But again, if the Islanders do trade that first round pick and get another pick later in the round, for example, the Blackhawks, I'm just not saying there's anything imminent, but the Blackhawks have the 3rd overall pick and the 25th pick. The Sharks also have multiple first-round picks. So if part of a trade includes, the Islanders swap first and third with Chicago, and they throw in that 25th overall pick, that's a spot you could maybe take a player like Cameron Schmidt. And it would be interesting, to say the least, to see, here's a guy who could give the Islanders some speed and some ability to, add a little offensive juice. His skating is considered elite. His puck skills are above average. His shot is high end. And he plays with a little bit of physicality, which is important when you're that small. You got to be feisty, and he is. But his hockey sense is considered a little bit below average at this point. And I wouldn't want to take him in the top 10. One scout compared him to Kailer Yamamoto, which is an interesting comparison. There are some really good traits. He is projected as a middle six winger. And again, would he fall to the Islanders in the second round? The Athletic had him ranked 34th. I mentioned Elite Prospects had him 22nd. Is it possible he falls that much? Maybe, based on his lack of size. And then the other issue is, if the Islanders acquire another first-round pick as part of a trade, maybe he comes into play in the latter portion of this first round. But I wanted to put the name out there. I wanted to give my viewers and listeners an idea of what the Islanders are doing, who they're meeting with, and maybe, tell you a little bit about him. But that's news, kind of closing out the news coming out of the scouting combine. All right, time for our Islanders birthday of the day. And today is the 56th birthday of former Islanders defenseman Mathieu Schneider. Schneider, a native of New York, 5'11", 187 pounds, third-round pick of the Canadiens in 1987, won a cup with the Habs in 1993, which still remains the last time a Canadian-based team has won the Stanley Cup. Joined the Islanders late in the 94-95 season, spent most of 95-96 with the Isles, and then was traded to Toronto, played for the Rangers, the Kings, the Red Wings, the Ducks, the Thrashers, the Canadiens again, and the Canucks, and then the Coyotes. So he certainly had a lengthy career with a lot of teams, played in 1,289 NHL games, 223 goals, 743 points, and 1,245 penalty minutes, at 11 goals, 54 points, and 114 playoff games. None of those with the Islanders. But again, as I said, he did indeed win a Stanley Cup. An offensive defenseman, good on the power play, and just a solid offensive defenseman. One of his better games as an Islander, how about January 30th, 1996, Islanders hosting the Buffalo Sabres at the Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum. And in this game, it is Dominik Hasek in goal for Buffalo. Eric Fischel is the goalie for your New York Islanders. And in this game, with the Islanders and the Sabres even at 2 after one period, our Islanders' birthday of the day, Mathieu Schneider sets up Travis Green for a power play goal 44 seconds into the second period. Who was in the penalty box? Doug Huda. Just saying. Familiar name, right? That made it 3-2 Islanders. And this game ends up going to overtime, tied 4-4. Pat LaFontaine tied it for Buffalo with 5 seconds left in regulation. But who gets the game winner in OT? Our Islanders' birthday of the day, Mathieu Schneider. Bob Sweeney and Martin Straka with the assists. Islanders win it in their fisherman jerseys 5-4. For Mathieu Schneider, he had a goal and an assist. He is a +1. He had 3 shots on goal, and yes, he potted the game winner. 22 saves for Eric Fichaud in this game. Mathieu Schneider, a native of New York City, he is our Islanders' birthday of the day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night until the Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. You can find NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you have a question, a comment, maybe a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, email us at lockedonislanders@gmail.com. If you leave your first name and where you're from, we're happy to mention you on the show when we discuss whatever's on your mind. You could follow the show on X at Locked On Isles. You could follow me, Gil Martin, on X at Ice Wars, NYR vs NYI. We'll keep you up to date on all things Islanders throughout this important offseason. We're getting closer to the draft, folks, just a couple of weeks away, and it's great to talk Islanders hockey with you anytime. Everydayers, we are back tomorrow. We'll hopefully have some more insight into what the Islanders are thinking with regard to this year's draft and a lot more. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and of course, let's go Islanders.